and welcome to Data Conversations Over Coffee with myself, Craig Stewart. It's another cold day in Johannesburg. I don't know what's going on. Last week, we were up to sort of 24, 25, shorts and t-shirts, and now we're down to about 2 degrees this morning. So I'm nicely rugged up. I just said to my guest, Emmanuel, he's always so well dressed, probably the best dressed man in data. I think whenever I see him at an event or at the Standard Bank offices, is always so nicely dressed in his traditional outfit. So let me introduce Emmanuel Osanga. He's the head of Africa, the Africa Region's data office at Standard Bank, and someone that I've actually known since the first events that we did in South Africa way back in 2016, and has always been keen to be involved and share his knowledge. So Emmanuel, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
No, thank you, Stuart, for having me. I'm very excited about what we'll talk about today, and thank you for always keeping me in mind in regard to this data journey, the work that you've been doing across the continent. I think you've really lifted the subject that we're talking about today across the continent through your conferences. So I appreciate being part of that journey.
Yeah, thanks. That's very kind. I mean, I think people are so keen to develop their knowledge, you know, both here in South Africa, across the rest of the continent, the Middle East. I did a call with Jawad from Pakistan last week. I've got a call in the US and the UK coming up. So it's just nice, I think, to bring the global data analytics community together to share knowledge. And it's, you know, it's really makes my life easy when people like yourselves and everyone else is actually keen to share. So maybe you can give everybody a little bit of more of an introduction into your role at Standard Bank, looking after the Africa regions and the data office for that. Maybe you can tell us where that sort of started and sort of, I guess, where each of those offices are on their data journey before we really dig into, you know, how you're building a data-driven culture across the continent.
Yeah, sorry, Stuart. My role is really a very interesting one. It's an I call it a data evangelist, to be honest. The role cuts across the 17 countries where we operate. My role is really to help those countries build a specific data strategy that would support their business. Obviously, in the fact that they are part of the Standard Bank group, we do define some parameters and the strategy at a group level, but we still need a specific data strategy in country. So my role is really to support the chief executives in those different countries to build a data strategy that would help them grow their business. In really simple terms, that's what it means. So it's really taking what the group has defined as the overall group data strategy and helping countries to shape a strategy that would be relevant to their market. As you know, there are regulations that are in those different geographies or markets where we operate, which are slightly different to what we have at a South Africa level. So my role is really to enable those countries to build their country data strategies.
Yeah. And you sort of mentioned, I mean, 17 countries, there's a lot of different cultures to take into account. There's different business environments, economic environments, but obviously you kind of work under that banner of Standard Bank. And when I had a coffee conversation with Simpiwe Pakati, we were also talking about, you know, how he's gone about sort of working in those different regions as well. So maybe you can shed some light then on, you know, what are some of the differences that you see? I mean, obviously we can't go through, you know, all 17 countries, but maybe sort of by region, you know, East Africa, West Africa, etc. What are some of the sort of major differences in terms of where they are with their data analytics and sort of what they're using it for? Or is it fairly common across all of them?
So there are different maturity levels, but let's talk about just the culture of the people from East Africa. And within East Africa itself, you have different countries at different levels. They completely have different cultures. To a very upbeat culture in the western part of the continent, to a more neutral southern part of the continent. So just dealing with just the people culture before you talk about data.
Mm.
I think, and recognizing that, having worked obviously in most of those countries, I worked in Uganda, Nigeria, and I've been in South Africa for 6 years. So I kind of have a view and a feel of the cultures, that the actual people culture that exists in those different geographies. So it's really to navigate through that, to when you start really evangelizing and pulling people across the line when it comes to the data specific culture, you have to be cognizant of those different cultures in those different areas. So that's, for me, I think it's one of the key things that we've had to navigate to be able to land what we want to land in terms of a data culture in those different organizations or different countries. They vary, different maturity levels, and we did not start the journey with all the countries at the same time. We kind of took a blueprint that we wanted to test, and we tested that through specifically in Nigeria. And once it worked, we then started to roll it out to the other countries. So there are different levels of maturity, country by country. And we do believe that there are specific pillars that you need to get right in building that strategy on that data journey. And those pillars, as you know, Stuart, the data life cycle, there are a number of capabilities that you need to put in place. So it's walking through each of those capabilities, right from where the data is captured to how do you manage quality, to where do you have a governance framework in place, to do you have the appropriate data architecture that you need to learn that strategy. So there's quite a lot of pillars that you need to make to get right in building those. So different countries are different maturity levels, I must say. And the other thing is we have different sizes of operations across these countries. So the scale of the organization also determines what you can then put in place. Where we have small operations like South Sudan as an example, you may not have the ability to put all the capabilities that you require in that country compared to South Africa or Nigeria, which is a big operation where you actually can afford to put all the data capabilities in a very short span of time. So it really varies from country to country is what I can say.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. Talk there about, maturity across different countries, organizations, etc. And I think, it's you're looking after 17 countries, and even then if you kind of dial it back to companies in South Africa or, individual countries that don't have operations across the continent, they're just sort of doing data analytics, not in isolation, but, they're a sort of a one unit business. How do they actually go and measure their data analytics maturity? Because one of those things you can say, well, we're immature, we're just starting, or we're really mature, we've been doing it for 5 years. But is there any sort of strict measure that you use or you can share with people that says, okay, this is how we actually measure our data analytics maturity? Because if you don't have a certain score, let's call it that, you won't know if you're improving or going backwards. How do you go into each of those operations in each country and actually do a maturity assessment to get a sort of a certain level, a benchmark, and then if you're actually moving the needle or not?
Very interesting question, Stuart. But we do have within the group, we've looked at a number of maturity frameworks that exist in the market, and we've tailored something that really works for us, which is a combination of multiple maturity frameworks and there are quite a number in the market that you could use, but you need to tailor something that works for you. We do partner with some external consultants, including MIT, and we've taken that and kind of developed kind of the journey and spectrum that we want to follow in terms of, and also when you talk maturity, there are certain things that are non-negotiable. So there are regulations that exist in those different countries that you need to comply with, and there are capabilities that are required. So for instance, BCPS 239, as an organization, we need to comply with that. So it means that in terms of prioritizing the capabilities that we put in place, we actually need to make sure that that is in place for us to be compliant. And those are kind of the way we measure ourselves, from just being compliant or bringing efficiencies to the point where you actually be able to then produce data products that you can then extend to your clients. So it varies from, that's kind of the maturity models. We take the existing maturity models, look at what our regulators want and what we want to achieve as an organization, as a business strategy, and plot something that would then fit kind of a standard bank mold, so to say. And we do measure then through those specific standard bank framework on where each country is and the capabilities we need to put in place to make sure that they move. I think the overarching thing really, and it's tying to the topic that we said we need to discuss this morning, or we're discussing this morning, is about culture. What we've noted is that you can create fancy analytics models, but if the guys who are actually going to make use of those models don't understand the importance of using those models in delivering to our clients, it will be a waste of effort and time. You will have models, piles and piles of models sitting in with your data scientists, but not being utilized. So they are busy producing the models, or these data science models or insights.
Yeah.
But if the actual all our employees do not understand the benefit of applying or using these models in serving our clients, it will be a futile effort.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think we'll get into that sort of, creating that we always talk about a data-driven culture. And I think that's correct, because, data is kind of the fundamental of the whole thing, but it's ultimately also that analytics-driven or insights-driven culture, which I think is really important. We'll get back to that shortly. I just think maybe for those people that are watching that, perhaps don't know which frameworks to use, that you talked about at the top of that question, maybe just quickly run through what are some of those frameworks that you used from vendors and consultants, or maybe it's a Gartner or something like that, that people can go and look up and perhaps start to use to build their own internal assessment framework.
So there's a McKinsey model, there's Gartner, we also have MIT. So it's a combination of those different, there are different consultants. I think even Deloitte has one. So they are available online, but it may not fit your specific mold. So you need to take those and make it relevant. And there are two sets of maturity assessment, to say. There's one that we refer to as the capability maturity assessment. So you take a specific capability like data quality, master data management, data governance. Those are capability models, but then you have what I call the actual data culture kind of maturity model, where you as an organization as a whole in understanding this subject of data. So there's a distinction actually between those, kind of looking at what you call the data citizens and a capability like data quality management capability model. So we kind of distinguish between those different categories. The overall organization, checking the temperature of the entire organization, and then looking at the capabilities that you're building and measuring where you are in building that capability. How mature are we in data quality management as a specific capability? Yeah, so I just wanted to distinguish those two.
Yeah, no, that's really valuable. And I think, people or companies that are starting out on this journey or have kind of started it but feel that they're not getting anywhere will find a lot of value in that they need to think about the capability side of things, but also the overall sort of data maturity and data literacy of the organization as well. Because it's a big thing, it's not just a very small part of the business. It's something that runs, potentially the entire business, the decision-making, etc. And I think that's where people get a little bit sort of overwhelmed with how many things there are to sort of try and manage, develop, and bring in those capabilities. So let's then start to dig into something that you said just before we actually started the call that we could talk about for the entire day. And that's around the culture of being data-driven within an organization. And let's also put in there insights driven, because I think that's a very important point, that the insights that are derived from the data, the models, etc., are actually actioned into the business, right from a board level all the way through. So it's a big topic, as you say. So maybe you can start off by, what is the framework for building a culture of data centricity, insight centricity within an organization? Because there's always these culture programs, it's change, there's customer experience change programs, there's HR change programs, etc. But the data one is what we love and what we want to talk about. How do you kind of firstly fit that into the organizational plan, and how do you go about really building a culture around the data usage, insights usage in an organization?
Yeah, Stuart, I think it's a very important topic for us. I think the very first thing is that we do believe that if you move the hearts and minds of the people, that's 50% of the journey done. If you can cause everyone, create that temperature in the organization that this is an important subject, and people are kind of drawn to that that thinking, then you probably are close to winning the war. Number two is that anything that you build, when you talk data-driven insight, has to be aligned to your business strategy. What is the business strategy? And how is data going to support that business strategy? Once you infuse data within the data strategy, which is the overall business strategy, I think you're close to, I think just that balance. And for me, it's the tipping point, ability to infuse data within a given data strategy. So if you look at, for instance, Standard Bank, where we have three strategic pillars of client centricity, an integrated organization, and digitization. If you take data and infuse it in those that business strategy, it becomes so easy. So me as a data practitioner, the questions I need to answer, the response I need to give to the organization is that how is data going to enable those different pillars of our strategy? And once I can answer that and articulate that, I can then be able to move the entire organization in my direction, because I'm saying, guys, for us to be able to deliver this strategy, business strategy, we need to infuse data in, and this is how data is going to enable us to do that. So it's really, those would be kind of the top two kind of thoughts that you need to bring in the organization as a whole. One is just to infuse data into the business strategy, but also make it exciting, because I think the one problem that we probably have is that, and somebody says one of our biggest problems as organization is that we want to get everything perfect before you start to produce value. So the ability to create what I call some small carrot, because the heavy lifting work of data, it's quite tedious, and you need to do a lot. So it drains energy from people. So if you just think you're going to make sure that you have all the appropriate foundations in place for you to start to produce the insights that you're talking about, you will struggle. But if in the process of lifting, for instance, ensuring you have quality in your data, you're also producing something for people to see, insights in small scale that people can be able to see the value that this would create for them, you will begin to draw people's hearts and win them over in building that culture in the organization. So it's just really finding the balance between the heavy lifting work that needs to be done and producing some, what I call carrot over and above the stick, that people can actually begin to see and enjoy what you're creating. Do not create something too big. Start small, and I'm sure this is a familiar territory to most of the people listening to us. Is this whole thinking of agile? Take a specific use case and deliver on that use case and then pick another use case. Don't try and kind of boil the ocean. Like say, take one bite at a time. Is the best time. The best way to eat an elephant is you eat it in a piece at a time. So you need to take a bite at a time. Otherwise, you will choke the whole organization. So it's really, those are some of the thoughts I would share around how we drive the culture. But there are certain components that you really need to put in place. One of them, and this is what I call some of the critical success factors, is you absolutely need executive buy-in. If your executives do not buy into what you're driving, you'll be working so hard to get across the line. If you have your senior execs driving and supporting what you're driving in the organization, you definitely destined to win, in my view.
Yeah.
And then the number of things that we've done to shape that, and I could share some of my thoughts as well.
Yeah, and I think we can dig into it. And I think from the research and conversations that we've done and had, that executive buy-in seems to be less and less of a problem, as it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where the executives didn't really understand the power of data analytics, especially advanced analytics, etc. But I think it's got so much press and exposure now, that any executive team, board, etc., already knows that if they don't have data analytics at the core of their operations, they're certainly losing out. So I think that box is almost ticked. I wanted to kind of dig into the first one. You say, move the hearts and the minds of the organization, and 50% of the battle is won. I think that's where a lot of people struggle. They know that that's the most important thing. You've got to influence the human capital within the organization to really want to use data analytics, to respect data governance and data quality, and everything that goes with that. But not everybody who can do the heavy lifting, can do the data quality, the warehousing, the model development, necessarily has the skills to go and really influence people, get them excited, get them bought in, win the hearts and minds, as you say. And I think that, for me, does seem to be the bottleneck or the hurdle, is that they want to do it, but then they're like, well, I don't really know how I'm going to go and change and influence people. How have you gone about doing that? I see that you've also run sort of localized conferences around data to effectively evangelize the importance of it. How we could probably go into, Emmanuel's top 3 tips for moving hearts and minds, and each of those could then probably be broken down into another 3 tips. So maybe we can just delve into that a little bit deeper. How do you suggest people go and really influence people in a positive way to get them excited about data analytics in their role? Never mind the whole organization, right? It's more about, how is this going to help me be better at my job and serve my customers better?
Yeah. So I think there are a number of things that we need to do. One is you need help. You can't do this by yourself. So some of the initiatives that you're running, get some of your executives, and I'm talking to people listening to me, get some of your executives involved in, for instance, the conferences that Stuart runs. Get them to be part of, just to get to understand the art of what is possible. And Stuart, that's one of the things that we've done internally, is always maintain an external perspective. Do not keep the knowledge within, do not be restricted to the knowledge you have within your organization. So what we do in terms of that specific kind of localized conferences that we run is we invite our different stakeholders, like the regulators in those markets, and experts, industry experts globally, to come and talk to our leaders, talk to our boards and executives. I can tell you that probably that's the one thing that has really shifted the dial for us in moving the entire organization. When they see some of the use cases that are being driven globally, it opens their eyes more. Yes, people have heard about this being the capability that we need to get right to win in this market, or to win in your business. The issue is just the how. and some of those platforms actually enables our leaders to see the how. We get very practical use cases demonstrated in those forums, a short 2-day kind of workshop or conference, as you may call it, where those external consultants or industry experts demonstrate kind of what they've done with data in the organization. And we do look out for instance, very data-driven organizations or data organizations, as you may call it, like the big tech companies, to come and demonstrate what they've done with the data and insight. So that's the one thing, that always maintain an external perspective, bring that into your organization through partnership with either consultants or industry experts out there to really lift the thinking within your organization. So that would be one of the things that I think we need to get right. And that has really worked well for us. The second piece is you need a common language in the organization, a common data language. So what have we done? It's to ensure that everybody in the organization has a certain level of literacy. So you need to ensure that you actually lift the literacy of the organization entirely, not just for the data practitioners, because I think the challenge that we've seen is people try and look at a cohort of kind of data practitioners and build a lot of skills around that, and forget about the entire organization. So you have a small percentage of the organization really understanding this subject, but then you have left the entire organization. So what you need to do is begin to build that literacy level of the organization. That would be my second thing. The third one is really building skills. You may want to have a data-driven culture, but without the appropriate skills in the organizations, and I'm talking now specialized skills. Forget about what you'd call a native data scientist, but you need to get a certain level of skill in your organization to be able to really scale this capability and to extract the appropriate value. So I would say maybe those would be my top three consideration. With the skills piece, we know that globally there's a shortage of this skill. So you really need to drive programs that ensure that you have you are able to actually have appropriate or healthy pipeline of skills in your organization to embed this data culture in your organization.
Yeah, and I think that skills development piece is critical, and it is an area where people struggle. But I think maybe it's a conversation for another day, because I think we could take another half an hour just talking how to build the various levels of skill across the organization. One thing I did want to say to everybody listening is we are running our events virtually now, given the current state of play with COVID. But what that actually does is it allows people who normally wouldn't come to the conferences because they wouldn't spend 2 days out of the office, they didn't think that it was necessary for them to pay to go to a data conference because they're not necessarily a data professional, is that these conferences, that we do now, CDA Africa being the next one in November, it's totally virtual. Everything is effectively recorded and it's free to attend. So I would say to the data analytics people listening is get your executives onto those platforms, and I'll put details of the event in this post. But get them into that. So they don't have to watch every single session. They don't have to travel to a hotel. They don't have to go to Cape Town or whatever it may be. But they can really listen to how organizations have used data analytics to improve their customers, their operations, sales, cost efficiencies, etc. So I think we're kind of now been forced in a very good way to innovate how we provide the information, and so much more accessible to everybody now. The CDA Africa virtual event has already got over 1,000 people registered, and it runs 10th and 11th of November. So it just shows you how important this topic is becoming. But free content, go and make sure that everybody in your organization who needs to see these things can actually see them. So Emmanuel, we've kind of reached the end of our time, but I'll schedule another call for us because I think there's a lot that we can dig into around the skills development and further into the culture. So thank you so much for joining me and sharing your wealth of knowledge with everybody listening. Before I let you go, just as is sort of a customary on the shows. Maybe tell us a little bit about, you know, the tea and coffee culture that you've got, but also from where you come from, just to give some people some insight into that.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that from where I come, which is Uganda, we're second largest coffee producer in the continent, but we really don't take coffee, which is very interesting.
Such a shame because it's so good. Yeah,
we produce very good coffee, but it's not a big culture in Uganda. But it's kind of picking up now, I must say. As opposed to South Africa, coffee is the thing. If you don't take coffee in this part of the world, you feel out of place. So it's a different culture across the continent. I think it's very strong here compared to the other parts of the world. Yeah, but it's the diversity, just enjoying that diversity of how people think. And yeah, coffee is it's a big part of that conversation, especially here where I live now. You need coffees, lots of coffees to navigate the organization, and in even driving this culture, you definitely need to have number of coffees with your executives. So yes, it's something that is very intertwined in creating that culture and connection in the organization, like ours. So coffee. Have a lots of those coffees with your executives as you sell the idea and the concept of what you're driving from a data capability and data maturity perspective.
No, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I think, I can't remember who it was that I interviewed in the early stages of the show that also talked about those coffee meetings. I think it might have actually been in Tumaleng, Manali, who talked about the coffee meetings across the organization. And I must say, East African coffee from, you know, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Uganda is absolutely my favorite sort of flavor of coffee. So Emmanuel, thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to doing it again. But I know you're really active on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you'll be, you know, happy to help anybody that wants to connect with you and sort of take more of a deep dive into some of these areas around culture and skills.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
No, absolute pleasure.